All right, so we're starting this evening. Today is January the 18th, and we're picking up where we left off with Job last week. Just kind of give everybody a quick, fast run through what we did cover. We talked about the ideal of theodicy, which means the ideal of how can a perfect, all-knowing God permit evil? If he is good, how can he allow that to happen? We talked about where the book of Job fit with regards to the Torah and the prophets and the writings. Again, this would be part of the writings. We talked about the idea that, and we looked at all those different breakups there. And we talked a lot about the idea of Hebrew poetry. It's not so much rhyming words as much as it is repeating something time and time again. And then we talked about the idea of, we went on from there, we keyed in on the idea of, was Job a historical character? Again, a lot of times whenever you're looking at poetic books, sometimes they make this up, but as we were discussing a little bit before we actually started the recording, the book is set probably during the time of the patriarchs. Job is the one offering the sacrifices, and he's doing it with his family. That means it would predate the situation that we read about in the book of Exodus with the beginning of the priesthood, especially in the book of Leviticus, when he starts talking about the idea of the priest that God set up from the tribe of Aaron and Moses. And so as you're looking at it, he was a historical character, a man that at the same time struggles with right and wrong, like we all do. The book of Job, and Job is mentioned not just in the book of Job itself, but it's also mentioned by Daniel, Ezekiel 14:14, as well as the book of, actually Job is compared with Daniel and Noah in Ezekiel chapter 14 and 14. So obviously the Jews would have looked at Job as being a real man, a real person, and therefore this is a real story. James chapter 5 verse 11. In James chapter 5 verse 11, he even mentions the man Job. So again, I don't know that he could be looked at as just a poetic guy, or a guy that is a figment of somebody's imagination, but it obviously is a man that is struggling with the whole situation of how can a holy, pure God allow evil and wickedness in this world? And what should man's response be to this God who allows that to go on in this world? Do we try a lot of times to attribute certain things to God where he's supposedly punishing certain people? Mm-hmm. Now, I think there's something to be said about that. You look at the whole story of the flood in Genesis 6-9, he is using a natural event to punish the world at that time, to cleanse it as it was and start it all over again.
Well, he took credit for it, though, right?
Right, but he did take credit for it, and you knew exactly Noah, and again, we know about the story of the flood because of what we read in Genesis 6-9, and having it referenced all through the Bible time and time again. Another thing you think about is that as we go into Exodus, where God is actually using his people to judge other people, as in the case of the plagues of Egypt, those were given by the hand of God to prove that God has the right to do this, not only with his people, but also to the Egyptians and every other nation on earth. And that becomes a pattern that you see through the rest of the Old Testament. God will send other nations. He will allow the children of Israel to start, but how often does he have to punish them because of their failings? And then look at all the other nations: Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece. By the time of the New Testament, it's Rome. And again, in every one of those situations, you look at just secular history, you see that God punishes these nations and they're no longer around anymore.
They're referencing like Daniel, right?
Yeah, you go to passages such as Daniel, you look in Ezekiel, you look in Jeremiah, you look in a lot of these places, and not just these big nations, but also the small nations around them. And so God is in charge of all the nations. And I think a lot of times we as Christians need to remind ourselves that the Bible does stress the idea that we need to pray for those that are in authority, that they make the best decisions. And the thing that we also need to take consideration is the fact that God is going to allow certain kingdoms to ride for a while, and then they're not going to be around here for a while.
Yeah.
And he does it over and over and over and over again. So, we here in America, we love this country. But again, we're getting a little bit cocky, and we're getting to the point to where we're pushing sin all the time, more and more and more. There's going to be a reckoning.
Yeah.
It's just all there is to it.
Mhm.
There's going to have to be a reckoning. So as we look at it, again, the date of the book, as I said, we put it in pre-Mosaic time because of the patriarchal situations where he's making the sacrifices. And again, all the things that's happening there. We mentioned that as well. I talked about the 5 different dates. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail. Go back and read or re-listen to the first video. Then we have the idea, the main thing that we talk about here is the idea of the question of pain and suffering. And the theme of the book of Job is, why would a benevolent God allow pain and suffering to fall upon his creation? And again, I think Job gives us a 3-part answer. Number 1, God is worthy of love even apart from the blessings he gives us. And the idea is that, well, the greater I'm blessed, the more I'm going to love God. But no, you should love God just because God is God, not because of everything you're getting out of this deal. Right. That's right. Secondly, sometimes God does permit suffering as a means of purifying us and strengthening our soul. And then we've got to remember that God, being God and all-knowing and all wise, he knows what's best for us. And so as we look at this, we looked at a few lessons very quickly. We looked at some questions. Why are some men prosperous without any regard to their moral character? Why are some men punished without any regard for their moral character? Does God care for men, or does he not? If you were a pagan in some of the places that are getting floods right now, you would be thinking possibly that the gods are angry because all of your stuff is being washed away.
Yeah.
That God is angry at you. Something or other, you weren't doing what you were supposed to do to appease that God. And more often than not, that's what paganism is about. We want to make the gods happy to where we will be blessed and not be punished. But now you have a guy like Job who has done nothing wrong, and he's being punished anyway. And that's where we start having our struggles. Well, here's a man that knows God, that loves God, that is serving God, that is offering all these sacrifices seemingly every day to make sure that if any of his children or, said sin, that they would be taken care of. But bad things still happen.
Is that when you just said that part, would that be like they're not of age yet? So you're saying that they offer sacrifices on behalf of him.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying like they're not of age yet to understand those things? Or
I think that they were of age, because if we get into the book itself, we're going to see that they all go and eat at the older brother's house, and then every day they would go from one place to the other eating.
Yeah.
So obviously the older brother has to be old enough to have a house.
Yeah.
Very well a family. So that's something else involved there. So again, is there such a thing as disinterested goodness, which means does a person serve God? Should a person serve God without trying to say what's in it for me? And the thing is yeah. But I should not serve God with the idea of, okay, now God, you owe me, because God doesn't owe us anything. But the idea is that, I'd serve him because he is there and I'm going to do that. Another thing we learn is how deep sin can go. And Job is presented as a hero of faith. So again, he's the example that you can lose everything and stay faithful to God. And again, how often, and I think we've kind of brought this idea out a little bit, how often do people leave the church for just the littlest thing?
You mean like you say, well, you said that you could go through all that, and then so like for instance, like people who lost someone close to them and that kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've met some people that have left the church because they've lost jobs, they've lost hope.
Yeah.
And when they lose hope, then they think, well, why do I even try to serve God?
It's like a weak faith or something.
It is a weak faith. And that says something to us about Job's faith, that he hung in there with God, even though he wanted God to answer why. But he did still believe in God all through it.
Exactly. He had faith. When he's talking to him, he had no doubt that I'm talking to a real entity, that this person exists.
That's exactly right. And you make a very good point. He exists. I want him to answer to me why he did it. Yeah. But God at the very end of the book is going to say, I don't owe you any explanations. I'm God, you're not. And that disturbs us a little bit, because we want the explanations. We want the understanding that God is looking out for us.
Maybe he's saying he can't understand that. Like it's something that I can't really, you can't
understand. Job can't understand it, so I can't tell you any more than what's going on. And that gets us, that's, I think you hit the nail on the head. That gets us into the idea we will never understand God, because God's wisdom and abilities are so high that we can't understand it all. We can't understand him. The only thing that we can understand about God is what he has revealed himself to us in his word. So that means we've got to make a very special effort to understand his word to the best of our ability, so that we might have the faith. Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. But there's still going to be a lot of questions and a lot of ideas that we're never going to have the answers to. Faith would mean, even though I don't know the answers, and even though God is not explaining this to me, I still believe.
Don't you think this though, that like as far as like God answering the question, and I think this talks about in Job, but like there's so many things happening in the world.
Right.
You've got the animals, you've got the sun, you've got all these things just for the environment.
Right.
And then you've got other people, and God has all of that. He's controlling all of that.
Every bit of it.
And so sometimes it may not be purposeful that you get hit with something or whatever else. It might be for the greater good of the world.
That's right. That's right. And again, we don't know that.
Yeah.
Because we have tunnel vision. We think about our lives, what's going on and what's hurting us, so forth and so on. So that's where, again, faith comes in. And again, does God care for man? The answer to that question we answered last week. Obviously, he sent Jesus. And that's the answer of the whole thing. Now, how much can we know about God? Again, only what he's revealed to us. And so we emphasize these ideas. If we knew all that God knows, then we would be God.
You know, like, well, God is timeless. So, you know, man tends to a lot of times like try to govern a God by but the restrictions that we're bound by, time,
right,
life
and space, death. Right, and life
How
and
does
death.
He not have a beginning? You know, people just
that just boggles our minds. If you really sit down and think about it, God didn't have a beginning. He is eternal. So what does that mean? Without beginning and without end. So when we talk about going to eternity, I'm not sure exactly how it's going to happen. Somebody, as I've discussed this with them before, they said, well, is God going to brainwash us? I don't know how he's going to do it. But the bottom line is that
be no sin.
There will be no sin, which I can't even begin to imagine. There will be no more time. Because if you're in eternity, there's not going to be any more time.
You won't be looking at your clock.
You won't be looking at clocks. I don't know that there's going to be any night there, because again, darkness is going to be totally dispelled.
That's a good point.
And we're going to have glorified bodies that are not going to get sick or tired. And again, as we sit and try to wrap our mind around, and I've only covered maybe about 5 things there,
Yeah.
but if we try to wrap our mind around any one of those things, we can't do it because we don't have any conception of what that's going to look like. And so it's
I think that's why Jesus draws emphasis on certain things. Like when he's talking to like farmers, he's using euphemisms that a farmer would know.
That's exactly
like
right.
The wheats and the tares and stuff like that. These are farmer people.
And fishermen.
Yeah.
And, women taking
it.
care of house, all of that stuff. Yeah, that's exactly. And you think about how that's what the Bible is. The Bible is God's revelation to us in a way that we can understand what we need to do to make it through this life until we finally make it home to be with him. So that's what it's all about. Now, as we look at the book of Job, we're going to start off this evening, definitely in the book itself. But as we look at the book of Job, we're also going to know that God is not going to really come on the scene. He doesn't say, or he doesn't give any answer to Job until Job 38.
Yeah.
So from chapters 1 and 2, where you see God working in heaven, Job doesn't know any of that. So whenever he struggles through all of this, all the way through chapter 37, then God's actually going to talk to him.
I think he does that with us a lot of times. Like maybe he holds back a little bit. Let me see if they're going to get.
Yeah. And again, if you're listening to this again, does God sometimes hold back so to whether or not to see what we're going to do? And I think that's very possible. And one of the things that he one of the points I make here is that leaders may want to ask God hard questions, but we don't have the right to demand that he give us an answer because he's God and we're not. And every time I think of that, I think of that silly movie, where it's about a Marine in a base, and he said, "You can't handle the truth."
Oh yeah.
And every time I think of that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, we may not here now be able to handle that truth at all.
Can't handle looking in the face of God.
So you're not going to be able to handle all of the way he's thinking and how he does everything. So that just necessarily may be some of the best explanation of what we're talking about. We don't have the right to demand that God answer us. And God teaches us that in this book. Yeah. So when we start to get into this book, again, let's just get into it itself. The first 2 chapters are what we call the historical prologue. They're the history. They tell the circumstances of Job. They talk about the discussion between Job and Satan as to Job's character. And they talk about the test, the first 2 chapters, which God allowed Satan to test the faith of Job. So as we look at this, perhaps maybe this gives us just a little glimpse of what may be happening behind or up in heaven that we cannot ever possibly know in detail. So let's look at chapter 1 and see how it starts off. So it starts off in chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. So the very first verse tells us what about Job. Number 1, he was a man. And there was a man. So that says what? He's just like every one of us. Yeah. He knows problems. He knows difficulties. He knows struggles. And he's like us. He's subject to like temptations, like passions, like we are. And as you look at this, one of the things as a man, as I appreciate about Job, is the fact that look what he bore up under as we start seeing what he goes through. And Tommy a lot of times complains because life is a little bit hard, but I've not gone through anything near what Job has gone through. So there was a man whose name was Job, and the Bible, God is saying up front that, again, he tells us what kind of man that he is. Look at the character of him. He was blameless and upright.
You think that's like, doesn't mean he's like never sinned. It just means like he's attempting to
He's dealing with the sin whenever
Yeah.
and he's dealing with the sin that he understands as sin in that patriarchal age. He didn't have the complete revelation. He didn't have the Bible to look down on or look at. He just looked at what God was telling him at that moment in time. And so you're exactly right. If it's in that respect, he it does not mean that he was sinless. We do know that he did, commit some sins. Look at Job 9 and verse 20 very quickly. As Job is talking, he talks about the fact he crushes me with a tempest, multiplies my wounds without cause. He will not let me get my breath. Verse 20, though I am in the right, my own mouth would condemn me. Though I am blameless, he would prove me perverse. You see, Job knew that he is not perfect. So a lot of times when we think of the word blameless, we think of somebody that's perfect, but that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And in fact, some of the passages, the King James Version actually translates it, him being perfect.
What about like maybe possibly that he's repented of it?
That's exactly what he's talking about in all these. He's blameless in the fact that if he knows he sins, he's dealt with it.
Yes.
Okay. And that's what's important. Notice also he's upright. So that suggests the idea he stood for what's right. He's honest. He's sinless in his dealings with others. Okay. So now I want you to think about this. God is inspiring Moses or whoever it is to write this. And God is saying what about Job? He is blameless and upright. So that says a lot about the fact that God calls him this way. Can you think of a better commendation that any man could have than he could be sitting back saying blameless and upright? I think about in my own life some sins. I think about in my own life some things that I've done. And so I can't say that I'm perfectly 100% blameless, but whenever I realize I've done something wrong, I try to make it right. Okay. And I think that's what's important of it as well. So he says this, he feared God. Now, fearing God, let's talk about that word fear. There's the idea of fear a lot of times suggests the idea of shaking in our boots fear. Yeah. And a lot of times when men come before God in the Bible, as Moses in the burning bush, they all fall down on their face. There is the shaking in the boot. I'm afraid I'm going to die right now. Fear. Then there's the idea, and again, the context of all the passages would always talk about this. There's the idea of reverencing God, respecting God, understanding who God is and why he is that way. All of those things are going to be involved there. So here's a man who feared God. He listens to what God says. He's following what God says. He's not going to be perfectly perfect, as we understand it, but he's handling sin the way God has told him to. He's taking care of his family the way God has told him to. He set the example in that respect in every sense of the term. And notice the Bible says he did this. If you're looking in the New King James Version, he did this continually. Job did this continually. And the English Standard Version does not give us that little phrase. Well, yeah, it does down in verse 5. If you'll notice, he said, thus did Job continually. So he's always wanting to make sure that he's in the right relationship with God. And truly think about this in this respect. That should be our desire all the time. All the time. Not just when we're in church, not just whenever we're feeling holy, you know what I'm trying to do. But we've got to do it all the time. Notice he goes on. He talks about what he had: 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camel, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. This man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Now let's look at him from a viewpoint of how rich was he? Very, 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 very wealthy. Again, he emphasizes.
I was thinking about today. It really would be rich to have a horse. You have to be rich now to have a horse.
Right.
You would have had to feed them. You have to provide food for them.
Right. And think about 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. This guy had to hire a lot of people to take care of just for the animals.
You got to feed those people too.
Yeah, you got to feed those animals. And you got to feed those people. You're emphasizing that exactly right. So he was the richest man that you could ever possibly imagine. And notice,
Well, that was wealth back then, though.
yeah,
Because wealth wasn't necessarily monetary, like a physical piece of paper.
right.
It might have been traded for.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the wealthy. And again, that's the argument that Satan's going to make to God. He is doing this because you have blessed him this much.
Yeah.
And so that's where the argument starts between God and Job, or excuse me, Satan. So notice he said his sons used to hold a feast in the house of each one on his day. So he had 7 sons, and what happens? 7 days of the week, they would go from house to house to house and eating. Okay, so that says a lot. He had his sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So that emphasizes again, you got 7 sons, 3 daughters. All righty. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would sin and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning. Notice the word early in the morning. He wanted to make sure that they were right in God's sight all the time. Okay. He will say,
that's a form of sin too, though. If you don't, if you're sleeping all day, that's a form of sin.
That
That's
is
the Old Testament.
right. But think about as well, not only is his family drawing off of his wealth, but his family also is serving as well. And I mean, for each one of them to have a house, they would have to work for it. I'm sure he would not
build
just,
it at least.
Yeah. I'm sure he would not just give it to them on a silver platter. He would demand the same thing out of them that he himself is trying to do.
So, but maybe the children, like, they work in the farm.
They're working the farm. Yeah. Different parts of it. So he said they would rise early in the morning. He would all rise early and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. Now, again, when you think about the burnt offerings in the Old Testament, there were burnt offerings that were specifically mentioned, and that would involve every part of the animal being burned.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in essence, you're taking about, so you're looking every day, think about this, 365 days a year. Every day he's offering sacrifices for his sons and daughters, lest they have sinned. So you're looking 10 animals a day for 365 days.
He's sacrificing 10 animals?
Huh?
He said sacrifice 10
Yeah,
animals.
he would be offering it for each one of the sons, each one of the, notice according to the number of them all. So you're looking at 10 a day for 365 days. That's 36,500 animals, right? Or give me the math. Maybe 33,650 animals.
Okay.
3,650 animals through the course of a year.
They also got to grow up too, though.
Yeah.
Right? They've got to grow up, and then the one without blemish, right? Or is that not?
That would have been included too.
Is that a thing now, right?
Yeah.
That's a thing at that point because Abel would have done that.
Yes.
With the one without blemish, the best one.
Right.
Is what it means, right?
That's exactly right. All the time, because God would always, he would deserve the best, right? It's specifically mentioned in Exodus 12, where you've had the Passover Lamb. And again, it had to be a lamb without blemish and without spot. But it wasn't something new to the Jews because, again, they were living under the patriarchal age and they would have understood a lot of this stuff. Exodus just only codifies a lot of what they were doing, but it also adds a lot more because they're now going to be a nation, and they now are going to be, it's not going to be a family thing as much as it's going to be a national thing.
Yeah, this is definitely before Moses or before all of that, because if it wasn't, then he would have had to have been of the Aaron priesthood, and he would have had to have done it in a temple.
Right.
Under
or in the tabernacle or the temple, one or the other. So both of those, so all of this, again, that's the setting of what we're talking about here. And notice he says, it may be, just even talking about the possibility, Job says, you know what, it may be that they have sinned, and I don't want them to be punished because of a possibility of them sinning. So it just emphasizes that much more to me, the heart that Job had. The heart of a relationship with God, the heart that he had for his family, taking care of his family, setting the great example for his family of what being a servant of God really was like. Now, think about this all, and notice as you look at that, he said, it may be the children have sinned. It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus, Job did continually, all the days of his life. In my notes here, this was not a Sunday thing.
But you know, it's kind of funny though, because I mean, that's the kind of thing like a father, right? But he can't save them.
No, he cannot.
Yeah. If they do wicked, then they're wicked.
They would be punished. But no doubt, and I want you to think about it in this respect, if they saw him do this day in and day out, he's setting the example and hopefully helping them to understand the relationship they need to have with God as well. And I think that is brought out in the Old Testament, where he emphasizes the idea that the fathers are supposed to be the heads of the house. We see it repeated in the New Testament, where, you know, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You know, so this is something that was going on even in the patriarchal time, that's brought over into the Mosaic time and is brought over into the Christian age as well.
That brought up a good question that I was thinking about. Like, okay, so if like there does say something, and I don't remember where it's at. I think it's the New Covenant, but it says something like, well, if the wife does leave the faith or whatever, she's justified by the husband. So
yeah, that'd probably be about 1 Corinthians chapter 7
or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What is that? Is that what you're talking about?
1 Corinthians 7 is talking about the marriage relationship.
Is that talking about the fact that maybe that the husband is going to bring her back?
Very possible.
Okay.
But you've also got to realize that this, from this viewpoint, now you will also go through the Old Testament and find cases where this is not the case.
Yeah.
Where the men weren't strong enough and their wives led.
Yeah.
And you'll see that during the time of the judges, there would be a woman judge.
Yeah.
Because there was no man up there stepping up to the plate doing what needed to be done. It emphasizes the idea that the greatest responsibility of spiritual matters is on the man in the house.
Exactly.
That's it.
There's no female prophets, really, I don't think there is.
So, well, there was some female prophets, but nothing written.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to see about some female prophets. Miriam, Moses' sister, was considered to be a prophetess. Okay. So just keep that in mind too. So the thing is, I think these first 5 verses, emphasize the kind of character that God, or the relationship that Job and God had. It emphasizes the character that Job had. It emphasizes the idea, think about the 7 sons and 3 daughters. Again, could very well have reference. Think about we even talk about 7 being the perfect number. You know,
that's the number God uses.
Yeah, because God uses that a lot. The 7 churches of Asia, over and over and over again. You have 10 is also another important number that is often used. Okay, think about the respect they paid their father. Think about the influence this man's religion was on them. And so again, here's something else that should be pointed out. A man can be rich and godly. Now, a lot of times whenever we see rich people, we think about they've obviously cheated somebody, they've done something somewhere down the line to be as rich as they are.
Yeah.
But here's a man that was rich and godly at the same time. Abraham was rich and godly. Job was rich and godly. And
you see a lot of that in the Old Testament. Like Jesus pointed out the error with the wealth. He said, well, go ahead and give it all away.
Yeah.
And then we'll find out exactly where you're at.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The rich young ruler.
Yeah.
That's what he tells him to do.
Yeah.
And again, why? Because our riches a lot of times get in the way of God.
You know, this guy said once in a movie or something, he said, eventually you get to a point where things own you rather than you owning them.
That's exactly right. You've got to take care. And think about it. We're not even that wealthy, but true or false, we've got to constantly make sure our car's running.
Yeah.
We've got to constantly make sure we've got a job to where we're paying the utilities to have our stuff that we got, our computers and all this other stuff. So in a sense, he's right. They drive us rather than us driving them. And you're exactly right. Now, keep in mind, and I think that the first 5 verses of this book kind of helps us to understand this sets the tone for the rest of the book in the fact that, okay, he's blessed by God. He's faithful to God. So now all of a sudden, we get into the idea, okay, how is Satan going to use this whole situation?
Wait, I got a question too.
Okay.
So if we're dating this back to Genesis, okay, yeah, well, the first only other incident that we'd have with Satan would be the garden.
That's right.
Okay, I'm doing this.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. It's like basically like the second appearance.
Right. I mentioned earlier about the burnt offerings being predated before the Mosaic law was given. That's found in Genesis 8 at verse 20 and Genesis 22. So obviously, this was something that came to be not just with the Jews, but with all other nations, where they're all sacrificing animals to these gods. Okay, so this is where it all really starts off. All right. So you see the kind of man Job was. Now what happens? If this was a movie,
this would be a big scene.
Okay, this would be a big scene. You'd have the first part of the movie, the first 10, 15 minutes, how Job is living with all of his family, and just you kind of get the idea of what's going on. Now, all of a sudden, you have the problem, the difficulty. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan, and that's the actual Hebrew word, Satan, came also from among them. The Hebrew means, and a lot of times you could just, every time you see the word Satan, just say he's the adversary, the enemy, the accuser.
It's not his actual name.
No, it's what he is.
Yeah.
We go to the end of the book of Revelation, and he will say that the accuser of the brethren is cast down. So he's finally beaten.
That's a good point, though, because you draw on that. And then Jesus says he saw him fall like lightning. You go to, I think it's John. No, okay, Revelation. He's talking in there, and he's talking about possibly what happened before any of this stuff. Not even before Genesis.
That's right.
Where he says they've come down to earth. Oh, woe to the people.
Right.
That now. Yeah.
So there's a lot going on before that we don't know about.
Yeah, it was not talked about.
That's right. And again, because God is eternal, because obviously he's created the angels. And when we open the book in the Genesis, lo and behold, God is there.
I think that Jesus draws a little bit of emphasis on it, and some people will argue that like, okay, he says he was a liar and a murderer from the start. That could be two things. It was more than likely the beginning of the world, but it's quite possible, like you said, there's something that's going on there, like somewhere that he overstepped his boundaries in heaven, possibly lied, possibly sinned.
And the reason is because there's other passages where Jesus will say he was a liar and is the father of it.
Yeah, doesn't he say that he's going to set his throne or something? Isn't that saying said something like that? He's going to set his throne, like he's going to start his own religion or something.
I think there are some allusions to it.
Yeah, allusions to it.
But I'm not sure. I can't think of anything right there off the top of my head. Okay.
I got you.
So here it is. All right.
Sons of God is those angels.
Would probably be the angels.
Yeah.
And this is where, again, if you read Paradise Lost by Milton and some of these others, that they got the idea that there was some sort of a war in heaven even before God had created the earth. But
that's a book.
Yes.
What's it called again? Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. I think but again, it's not an inspired book.
Yeah, I got you.
This is just something that somebody thought of to try to explain what we're reading here, and how evil all came into the world.
Well, one thing about the angels, though, and here we have an instance. Now, I think that the devil, that he's trying to teach him something.
Right.
He's doing something. Now, it doesn't appear to be that the devil or the angels can repent and come back. It doesn't appear that he's put no system in place
for them.
Yeah,
that's
Jesus'
right.
death on the cross was not for them.
That's right.
And we're judged immediately when we die. They're not. Well, we're prejudged anyways. but they're not, they had this time period where he said, you go
Mhm.
ahead and just like he told Cain, go ahead and enjoy your time, run around the earth, whatever.
Mhm.
And when I get to you, I'm gonna deal with you.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Again, we're looking at all of this, and we're trying to pull back curtains
Yeah.
to see what happened, and we're having to make guesses because there's not specific anything in the
This is
scriptures.
the only one that really draws emphasis on.
This, there are some obscure passages possibly in the book of Ezekiel and Isaiah, especially in the book of Daniel. But again, you've got to be very, very, very careful when you're reading some of them, because sometimes people take them out of the context and say, okay, this is what happened before the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't really say that. It's just like any other book. You've got to leave it in its context.
Well, I
to see what
heard
it's talking
sons of
about.
God used it a different way too.
Right.
And then I think even Jesus said something like that or whatever. Somebody drew emphasis to it and talked about how sometimes even we're sons of God.
We are sons of
And
God.
the kings were sons of God.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So any kind of ruler, the angels obviously would be gathered around the throne, doing what the Lord said. The book of Revelation, apocalyptic literature, a lot of the apocalyptic literature, Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation, talks a lot about more about what's going on around the throne of God.
Yeah.
Than what, and again, because it's apocalyptic literature, a lot of it is very symbolic.
Yes. Exactly.
So that's why we have to be very, very careful not to put a literal meaning to some of the symbolic passages.
Yeah, and one thing you remember Daniel too, where I think it's Michael. Maybe no, it might not be Michael. It might not be told there what specific angel it was. I can't remember, but an angel was going there. I'm assuming it's Michael because Michael's the prince of Israel or something like that. But there's an angel that said, "I've been trying to get to you. I've been trying to get to you, but we're in battle."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Daniel chapter 9.
Yeah.
Yeah. So exactly, that's what's going on. Daniel chapter 7, 8, and 9 definitely is what's talking on about there. So the thing, again, what we're seeing here in Job, what we're seeing in those apocalyptic passages is the curtains of heaven are drawn back for just a little bit, but it's kind of like we're getting little snippets.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make a lot of conclusions based on those snippets. And we still don't know it all, and we won't know it all until we get there.
But isn't that kind of funny the way he's telling him like that? Like it almost seems like he's trying to save him. Almost, not quite, but it almost seems like he's trying to tell the devil, turn around and come back.
Yeah, I think that again, in all of this, God is not, well, obviously God is not willing that any should perish. Talking about human beings there.
Yeah.
I don't think that God would have wanted any created thing that he created would perish.
Well, like you said, we don't know about the angels and
Right.
what goes on in heaven and what
Yeah.
happens there. That's something that's out of our realm, but they definitely have something more than we have.
Right.
Information.
Yeah.
They might have a relationship a lot longer than we've had.
Yeah.
Because they didn't need Earth to be created first. They were probably took part in the creation.
That's right. So this is, like I said, this is what makes this book so fascinating. Yeah. We can get bogged down into those details so much that we miss the bigger picture. So let's always keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So here he is. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" He said, "I'm going to and fro on the earth, and walking up and down on it." Now that emphasizes something to me too. Think about that idea.
He is tempting.
Yes, he's tempting. Okay. The adversary. That's why he's called that. So this word is in Zechariah 3, Luke 22, Revelation 12. Okay. He's called the adversary. He's here to accuse. Now, what is he doing here in this situation? He is there to accuse Job so that he might cause God to act against him. Let's see how strong Job's faith really is.
Yeah.
So he's going to and fro on the earth. And he said, "Okay, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man." Now, again, here's where God is actually saying this to Satan. Notice who fears God and turns from evil. And we've already seen this earlier in chapter or verse 5.
Have you heard this theory though, that possibly there's some sort of a jealousy in some of the angels over us, and that maybe that, not that he's justified not saying that, but like maybe he's like, maybe the devil is going over there like when we were created, and he's like, these people are going to hurt you, these people are going to, they're not going to be good. So do you know what I'm saying? Because this argument right here is, it's a response to something.
Mhm.
It's a response. He's retorting to
Right.
something that's been said.
But we have to, again, be very, very careful.
Yeah.
That we don't put something in there that's
No, I
not
know,
there,
but I'm
you
just saying, it's obvious that he's stating something. It's almost what, obviously the devil's called the accuser,
Right.
but he's not, he's the accuser of us.
Right. He's the accuser of the brethren. That's right.
He's accuser of us.
That's right.
You know.
So I think that's very important to see. So, and again, notice that the Lord is very aware of Job and his life. Notice also that Satan is too. And here's the thing. He's a blameless and upright man. He fears God and he turns away from evil. So there's what's going on. Here's where the accusation comes in. The accuser of the brethren. Job says, or excuse me, Satan says to the Lord, does Job fear God for no reason? You take away his stuff.
Yeah.
See what happens. Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have protected him.
That's a spiritual protection.
Yeah, you have protected him. You have blessed him.
He's prevented the devil from going
out there and tempting him. And he says, the bottom line is, let me tempt him, see what happens.
Yep, exactly.
You have blessed the work of his hands. His possessions have increased in the land, but stretch out your hand, touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. Now that's arrogance on the part of Satan to say something like that to God. And again, God is going to deal with this one of these days.
But he brings out the worst in people.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and notice he's also, Satan does this. Think about us as human beings dealing with one another. Mm-hmm. Somebody makes us mad, we're always going to be what? Bringing out the worst in them. Yeah. Well, he's this way, and this way, and this is the reason why he's this way. And we are winding up following in Satan's heels by accusing him. Yeah. And sometimes we make the stuff up.
Yeah. Well, I've experienced that with someone I tried to save, and that they were like constantly picking apart other people.
Right.
And the truth is, like, I mean, I've psychologically broken it down. I'm like, you've got issues that you're not dealing with, and that's the reason why you're doing that.
That's exactly right. And a lot of times they don't see it as they do it there. So he says, you blessed him. So you stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, he's in your hands. Okay. So he's in your hands. He's in your hands. 1 Peter 5, verse 8. Our adversary, the devil, is as a roaring lion walking about, seeking whom he may devour. So you start looking at that. He's always looking for a chink in our armor. Mm-hmm. And this is the reason why we've got to be careful. Think about that. 1 Peter 5, verse 8 also let's look at a few passages of scripture. Go to Proverbs 4. Proverbs chapter 4. I hope I wrote these down right. If not, then I'll correct it in my notes. I'll try to send you my notes later, okay? Just keep that in mind too. Proverbs 4 and verse 23.
23.
Yeah.
Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of its spring
are the issues or the springs of life. I like that. He's warning us. Why? That's where sin starts. Where? In our hearts.
That's what Jesus said. Out of the mouth speaks out of the abundance.
That's right. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Notice Proverbs chapter 8. He says, verse 32, now therefore listen to me, my children, and blessed are those who keep my ways. He's talking here and he's using the ideal of wisdom And he's personifying. In other words, he makes wisdom a person.
But
So
you
he
know,
says, yeah.
you're talking about like there's instances where they talk about blessings and where we see this. Now, this instance is a physical blessing. This
Mhm.
is wealth, things like that.
Right.
I don't think all instances where they talk about blessing is necessarily that.
I agree.
Some of the blessing that he's talking about, you'll be blessed
Spiritually.
Might be, yeah, afterlife.
Right.
It might be that relationship with God.
Mhm.
You know,
That's right. So he says, hear instruction and be wise. Do not disdain it. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the door, post of my doors. And here he's personifying wisdom. And he says, blessed is the man who is following wisdom. And wisdom is thinking things through, not making these rash judgments that we often make, trying to think things through about the way needs to be done. We go to the New Testament and in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7:15. Matthew 7:15, as it comes to the end of the sermon, he says, what? Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. So there he's warning about people being this way, teaching false doctrine. So you've always got to be watchful, right?
Sheep's clothing, they're going to try to look like you.
That's right.
They're going to try to be
like
one
you
of you
and associate with you to where, hey, we're a whole lot more alike than we are separate, right? And so there's that idea in Matthew 24, 4 and 5. Again, as Jesus was talking about the destruction of the temple, he said, take heed, and he warns his disciples, take heed that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name saying I am the Christ and will deceive many. And so then he starts giving them a bunch of things that they will be, wars and rumors of wars and famines, pestilences, earthquakes, going on and on and on. But he says, what? Always be prepared. Don't let anyone deceive you. There is that very real danger. Don't ever do that. So, Satan is out there doing the same thing to us all the time. So we've got to think always in this respect. Be aware. Be aware. So in essence, God is saying, do you seek permission to try this man? Now, he knows what Satan's there for. He knows what Satan's there for. God knows exactly what's going on. So consider the life that Job has lived. Nobody else on earth has lived like Job. And again, some people think, well, this didn't really happen, that this was just a made up story, a big, long parable. But usually parables don't have names, right? Mm-hmm. Usually you don't have this long of a parable, obviously. So he, again, gives them this challenge. He said, the only reason you're doing this is because, again, one thing is you have to say this about Satan. Satan knows that Job is faithful.
Yeah.
I know the kind of man Satan saying, I know the kind of man he is. Yeah. God knows our weaknesses.
Oh, you mean by the fact that he's not questioning that?
I know exactly how the kind he is. I know he's faithful. God testified to the fact he's faithful. So he says, well, the only reason he is because. And this is what gossipers, rumor mongers do. The only reason they do certain things is what? Because of this situation. And we don't know the circumstances.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem when people go and try to a lot of these people preaching and stuff, and they're trying to tell people look, if you come to God, he'll do this and such for you. Mm-hmm. You get it, you get them under a false pretense, and then their faith is kind of false too.
And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So the implication is what? The only reason, notice he says, does God or Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him? You have blessed the works of his hands. His possessions have increased, but stretch out your hand. Now, here's the point. The only reason Job is doing this is what? You're blessing him.
Yeah.
That's it. The only reason he's faithful is for what he gets out of it. So what is the implications that Satan is making? Number one, Job is selfish. Take away everything you got, and he'll turn his back on you. Number two, he's hypocritical in the fact that the only reason he serves you is because he wants to continue to receive the blessings.
Yeah.
You see, this is the way Satan works. I appreciate Job because it's showing this to us. we think about him walking about as a roaring lion, seeking humiliating to devour, and that's true. But a lot of times we're not looking too well. A lot of times Tommy isn't looking that much at the lions around me, and then all of a sudden something happens and I fall.
Yeah.
All of a sudden something happens and I'm making a decision that is not the wisest decision.
Well, that goes back to, I don't know what the scripture is, but it says, beware when you go preaching to other people that you don't get tempted and beyond.
Above what you're able to do.
Which is especially true for someone like me, that even though maybe I grew up in a Christian family, but someone who doesn't grow in a strict Christian family, you've been out there in the world, got a lot of temptations. The devil has tempted me and succeeded in a lot of ways.
Right. But think about it as well. He has tempted you in many ways, but at least you are able to see it.
Yeah.
More than somebody that has always lived a sheltered life,
well,
and then gets thrown out there. Right?
The argument with the money thing too, though, is the thing. Like, I don't know how someone really comes to God like with a lot of money,
right?
Because like a lot of times people are coming to God when they're broken,
right?
I feel like that's kind of like you have to be desperate. They talk about that with addiction a lot. I've taken all these classes and done all that stuff, and they say, you don't get to that point till you reach your bottom. They say your bottom is where, that's where you're like, I want to change. You got to really, and they say if you haven't done that yet, you haven't got to that point, you haven't reached your bottom yet.
Right.
Hopefully your bottom's not death.
That's right. Now let's put your argument back into the situation with Job. He's lived a sheltered life. Everything's gone good for him. So maybe this is why he reacts the way he does. And then as we continue to look on, to where not only does he lose everything, but he loses his health.
Yeah.
Then that's when Job finally speaks and says what he says. And that's what, again, this whole book is all about, is how he's struggling with that. But his friends are going to sit there, as we're going to see a little bit later on. Job, if you hadn't sinned, none of this would have happened to you.
Well, you'd say like the Old Testament that they practice this, like, raise your children up right, teach them the ways of God.
Right.
That might be some of what that is, why it's helped him to have that faith.
That's right.
He didn't just produce it out of nowhere.
That's right.
It was probably taught.
He's had a relationship with God up to this
his
point.
Dad and his,
Yeah, that's right. So again, you protected him. You protect him too well. I can't find Satan saying, I can't find a chink in his armor because of what you're doing for him. You bless the work of his hands. You've got all of this other stuff because his work is wondrously blessed or increased. Of course, he's going to serve you. That's that's Satan's whole argument about Job all the way along. Of course, he's going to do this. All right. So notice he says, you blessed him. Stretch out your hand. Satan is now saying what? Like a man strikes a blow. Ruin him, strip him of everything he's got. Give Job a cross to bear. See if he doesn't change his tune. And he will curse you to his face. Now you have to say this. Satan firmly believed that Job would curse him.
Yeah. Well, Satan can't see the future.
No, he can't.
If he could see the future, he would have avoided the cross. We know that.
Yeah.
I mean, he thought that was a victory. I really do think that.
Yeah.
And I think all along that God knew, okay, well, Satan's going to, people, there's people that try to say that for God's sovereignty and all this, that God produced that. That's not true, because that would be a sin.
Mm-hmm.
What he did was he stepped back and he knew what was going to happen.
Right.
He didn't take part in any part of it.
That's
he couldn't have killed Jesus. He would be wrong for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, he knew the result of what was going to happen.
That's exactly right. So what does the Lord say? Now notice Job says, God, you stretch out your hand. And God says, all that he has is in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
All he's doing now is he's giving the permission. And you make the very, very valid point that it's not God doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's Satan doing it.
Yeah.
How many people have blamed God for bad things that's happened?
No, you know what's really funny about this, though? is it draws emphasis on it. It's not just that God stepped back, but it also describes it like God is faithful in him. God loves Job, and he's expecting Job to do the right thing. He knows that he loves him and he wants him to do the right thing. So for instance, it's not like God is saying, okay, well, I'm going to let him tempt you because I'm not going to take part in the sin, but I'm still going to by relation do it. It's like, he's like, I'm hoping that you're going to do the right thing. You know what I'm saying?
That's right.
I'm
And again, maybe in the same way that he felt about his son, when his son became a human.
Yeah.
You know, it was still the son's choice.
Yeah.
When he died on the cross.
Yeah. And but the devil produced it too, though.
Yeah.
Right. Because it says that he jumped into to what's his face, Judas.
Mm-hmm.
That he had part in that.
That's right.
Judas, he pushed Judas to go tell them that.
That's right.
And you know,
but what was happening all along with Judas anyway?
Judas was yeah.
Judas was wanting money.
Yeah. And
here was a way to make it quickly.
Yeah.
Wound out. What did he do afterwards?
There's a lot of crazy ideas going around. You know, so like they some of them probably thought that he's going to be an earthly king, and they were frustrated when he was like, no, we're going to practice peace and we're going to love our enemies. And a lot of things they're probably like, whoa, I don't know about that. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. I do.
So that's probably that. I mean, it's not to justify it, but yeah.
Right.
But he did play a part in that.
Right.
Yeah. Just like you said here.
Right. And this is why it's important to study these Old Testament books, so that we can see, if we had read Job before we saw the cross and all that other stuff, it helps me to understand the cross that much more.
Yeah.
It helps me to understand God's love that much more. It helps me to understand Jesus' love that much more. Because again, they all had the right somewhere down the line to sit back and say, no, this is not going to happen.
Well, there's some crazy people out there who will try to say that it was a failure because he died.
Yeah,
like,
no. Yes.
You know what I mean? They've started some doctrines that say, oh, well, you know, he failed. So that's not.
If he failed,
that's not the point of it.
Yeah. If he failed, what are we doing?
He
here?
still had a point
right.
to go and teach and do all that. He had to establish the doctrine. So I mean, but yeah, the death, obviously, the death on the cross is not a failure. It's
right.
Purposeful. We need it.
Right. Okay. So now let's see what happens. He says, don't touch him. Right now, he's not going to let him. Now later, he's actually going to touch him with disease. Okay. But right now, he's not. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest son's house. There came a messenger to Job, said the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the service with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So in essence, all your cattle, all your sheep, all your donkeys, they're gone.
Do we have any information on who these Sabaeans?
Sabaeans. Hold on a minute. I did look at that. Most people think Genesis chapter 10, 7 and 28 says that they were descendants of Sheba.
Sheba?
Yeah, Sheba. From Genesis chapter 10, verse 7 and 28. They were nomad robbers. And in some people believe that they were called Arabs, even at that point in time. The Sabaeans would have been the Arabs.
Yeah.
You know, going from one place to the other, stealing, so forth. Think about the idea that when you look at the whole Islamic thing, you have one group of Arabs fighting another group of Arabs. Yeah. So this is just kind of a continuation of what's been going on since the beginning of time.
Yeah, but don't they? Abraham has not been born, right? I get time periods always. Abraham's not born, right?
Well, again, we're not sure.
Born yet?
We don't know. And
but I'm saying Job, if we place it in Genesis, then Abraham is not born, right? Is that correct?
He's born in Job. Well, if they're the descendants of Sheba, that's Genesis chapter 10. Abraham don't come on the scene until Genesis chapter 12.
Okay.
So Genesis chapter 10.
Because I'm trying to see what you're saying about because they claim to be the descendants of Ishmael, and I think they're absolutely correct. They are the descendants of Ishmael.
Yeah, Ishmael, right. Yeah. And that's one group of Arabs, but there are other groups of Arabs as well. Just like Americans, America, I'm from Alabama, you're from wherever.
Georgia.
So we've, and And again, think about it, I'm not from up north, I'm from down south,
Yeah.
things along that line. They're all Americans, but at the same time, there's a definite diversity all the way
Well,
across.
yeah, because he says that when he says that the people's like with the sons, what is it? Is that I'm thinking of Noah? I can't remember. But he said something about that somewhere, that they were different, which a lot of people can't figure that out.
Right.
Probably produced an Asian son and a red-haired son. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
something like that. They were the different peoples. Like it was.
Yeah, whenever they spread out from after the flood.
Yeah.
Then that's why Genesis chapter 10 comes on the scene and starts at least giving us a list of the nations and where they start settling.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you're talking about that's marauders. That's what they call them.
Yeah.
Marauders go and they steal not just money, but they still
kill people,
resources from other people.
That's right.
So they ever talk about the end of the world, they talk about marauders will go around and steal your food and everything.
That's right. Okay. So he said the oxen and plow, and they struck down, and he says, now, and I want you to picture this in your mind. It's like Job is there, everything's going great, family's fine, everything's fine. And literally, as you read it in the text, it seems like he can't catch his breath. One thing happens, then another thing, and somebody else comes in and gives him, he gets this bad news, then 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 he gets this bad news. Notice that's what's happening. He says, the Sabaeans fell upon him. While he was yet speaking, there came another, said, the fire of God fell from heaven, burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped you, while he was yet speaking.
Okay, wait. The Sabaeans killed the servants.
Yeah, of the oxen and the donkeys. Okay. Now that's one group. Now, while he was speaking, here's the fire of God fell from heaven, burned up the sheep and the servants, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So this was another group. And then while he was yet speaking, there came another. Servants,
that you're talking about. That's one of his servants. One of his speaking.
Okay. Yeah. While he was yet speaking, there came another, said the Chaldeans. This would be the Babylonians. The Babylonians would be the descendants of the Chaldeans. Formed three groups, made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. And then here's the worst news, verse 18. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking in their oldest brother's house, and a great wind came across the wilderness, struck the four corners of the house, and they're all dead. So it literally, as I've envisioned it, Job can't catch his breath. He can't even begin to wrap his mind about what's happening. Every piece of bad news there could possibly be is there. The fire could have been a lightning so fierce that it killed all of it. Now, before you sit back and say that never happened.
But no, it didn't happen. Yeah. What was I gonna say? Oh, this is what I was thinking, because for me personally, I've only had one person that's really, really close to me that died. I mean, I've had a lot of people that died, but it's not something like you really, really wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
It's like at the first year, you go through these stages, you're in shock. You're like, this can't have happened. I don't believe it. This is a lie. I'm going to wake up. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. You probably don't wrap your mind around it for a while.
Yeah.
Later on, you kind of get to a point to where it's the grieving process, I guess.
It is part of the grieving process. And one of the things is there is a book, lady wrote it many years ago, The 5 Stages of Grief. Her name is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Mm-hmm. And she says, first is there's shock, then there's anger, and she gives 5 different themes you go through.
Yeah. And
supposedly that's how you grieve. But what she does not, and it kind of seems like if you read the book that you go from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and that gets you through the grief process. But what they're now finding out, she's right in the fact that you have these different stages of grief, but you don't progress from one to the other.
Yeah.
It's something, you could be going along and first there's the shock of you found out you lost somebody.
Yeah.
All right. And then you're right. I can't believe this. I'm trying to wrap my mind around it.
Yeah.
And then you start getting mad. What could I have done? And the thing about it is it's not a stage in the fact that you leave one stage and go to the other stage. You're still sometimes in shock that it happened.
Yeah, for a long time.
And it comes back, and you're still in shock that it happened. The anger.
Yeah.
What's
it like? So
yeah.
Somebody would just take it the wrong way if I said it. I would I don't think I've ever said that to my family or anything like that. I'm not really close with them anymore, but because of that, because my mom died. But like, I like whereas you're talking about, and this book is a good point too, because that could be a position that would cause someone to leave faith.
Right.
It's talked about that Darwin actually lost his daughter really young, and he was born into some Christian family or whatever else. But anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, I never for once said, okay, God's not real. I never for once said God doesn't love me and God hates me and God did this to me.
Right.
I mean, I tried to search for, that's not the answer. There's another answer out there.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then through all these years now, it's been about 13 years. And like, that was the most traumatic thing that ever happened because it happened really sudden.
Yeah.
She got hit by a car. And it was not expected. And after all these years of going through it, what I've realized is it was necessary for me to do a lot of things in my life that I would maybe not have never come all the way to God. I wouldn't have stood up and been my own man so much if I had leaned so heavily on this person that I loved, that I cared. You know what I mean?
Right.
In a way, it made me stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what those situations do like this. It either makes you stronger or it breaks you.
That's it. And the thing is again, in all of these different stages, you might go back and revisit a stage. You might still be in shock. You're just like, you thought you got over the initial shock, but as you're living day in and day out without that person, then it's still a shocking thing.
Well, you question a lot of that stuff. And then, I mean, I don't say, like, I think it's the line of questioning that's the problem. If you question God and you're like, God, how could you do this to me?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's sometimes that I still think like, wow, this would be good instances for my mom to be here. And then sometimes it's not to disrespect my dad, but my dad's really not been useful at all in my life ever. He's still not been a father today.
Right.
There's some things that I could use his help on.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And it's kind of, I mean, I've even told him that. And I didn't like, it's not to be like, I'm not trying to disrespect you, but if my mom was here, she would be doing something with this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Like she'd be helping me out.
Yeah. Let's take a minute, 5 minutes. Okay, we're picking back up in Job. We were just talking about the idea of how he just cut one piece of bad news on top of another, and it never ended. It's interesting is while he was speaking, how many times is that passage or that idea brought out? In verse 16, while he was speaking, there came another. Verse 17, while he was speaking, there came another. Verse 18, while he was speaking, there came another. It just boom, 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 all the bad news that there could possibly be all the way down the line. When we start looking at this, the idea of the lightning so fierce that it killed 700 sheep or 7,000 sheep, that blows my mind. It had to be something just beyond anything we can ever possibly imagine. Could have possibly been. Others have suggested it might have been a strong desert wind, the fire of God. The Sirocco. You ever heard of Sirocco?
Didn't Jesus rebuke the wind, though?
He did.
Rebuke the wind one time.
Yeah, he did. Some people think as well that this fire that came down may have been something like the situation in Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so you're looking at all of this and think about the idea of coming down from heaven. It seems like all these things. So Job might have been thinking, why is God specifically doing this? But who's actually doing it? Satan is doing it with God's permission. So again, you have these, let's see. going back to chapter 1 here a little bit, the three bands, it may very well have been some Chaldeans. In that respect, let's see, the Sabaeans fell upon them, the fire of God. While he was there, the Chaldeans formed three groups and made a raid on the cattle. So again, it was a common military strategy that they break into three and kind of surround everybody, and then he said, I'm alone there to tell you, verse 18 and 19, your sons and daughters were meeting, and think about how bad it was to lose all of your possessions. But the worst news was the loss of the children.
I know it's like the possession. I've done it several times.
Yeah. And so, you lose your possessions, but losing family, children are your most prized possessions.
Yeah.
If you call them your possessions, and the bottom line is, this would be the heaviest pain to Job's heart.
Especially all of them at once.
All of them at once. Yeah.
Yeah,
that would be just beyond anything that we could ever possibly imagine.
That happens to families though. Like, I mean, especially like cars, accidents, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the father lives or the mother lives and the children die.
Yeah.
It's sad. It's really sad. They go through a hard time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just
I had a friend like that. He went crazy. I met him afterwards, but he went crazy after his daughter or somebody died in a car accident, and his wife was driving, her his ex-wife or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
She was young. She was really young.
Again, think about it. They all died immediately. There was no warning. They died while they were feasting. And again, in this, a lot of times whenever you have this kind of situation happen, people question, why did God do this? A lot of times you do see where in scripture children die due to the sins of their fathers.
Yeah, sometimes.
David had committed the sin with Bathsheba, and that first child died.
Yeah.
But
I don't think it punished the baby though. It was punishing David.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, you think about it in that respect, it depends on what people think about children and God. I believe they're pure. I believe that God, accepts babes in, heaven.
It's the age of accountability, right?
Yeah.
Do you know where that's at?
I've heard
a verse, and I know it is in the Bible somewhere.
There is a lot of discussion as to how old.
Yeah.
We don't know.
But it doesn't say that it's, I could have swore it said that when they come to the knowledge of the truth or something, when they come to a point to where they can discern good from evil, which could be a teenager.
Yeah.
It could be young child.
And again, how old, it's obviously going to be different for every child.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to know different things because some children are going to pick up on things quicker than others.
But it's like saying that he can't, well, it's not that he can't, but like as talking about animals, like I don't know about the souls of animals or whatever else, but animals can't choose between right and wrong.
Right.
So therefore they're guiltless.
Right.
They're guiltless.
They're just there doing what God wired them to do.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
So if an animal attacks and kills something,
it's what it's nature.
Yeah, that's part of their nature.
Yeah.
We do know the difference between right and wrong, and we will be held accountable as a result of it. So think about this in this respect. There was another thing that hurt him as well, not just because of the loss of the children themselves, but he probably needed them.
Yeah.
And the loss of everything else he'd been losing.
Well, I was thinking too, though, they don't talk about this, but you remember the soldier that came to Jesus and he said, if you will say the words, then I know that my servant will be healed.
Mm-hmm.
They cared for these servants. They were part of the family too.
Yeah.
So they weren't just like how people will say, oh, they were slaves.
Well, and it depends upon the person.
Yeah,
obviously. It depends upon the scenario. Yeah. There were some slaves that were mistreated, and God makes it clear that, in those circumstances when they're helping you get your wealth, then you owe it to them to take care of them.
I don't remember where it's at, but somewhere in there talks about, or somebody was talking about it theologically, that that back then, when you didn't have money, there wasn't a job pool to go get into.
That's right.
If you couldn't find work, you would offer yourself as a servant, not
That's
to
right.
starve.
That's right.
Because it's like if you went out there in the elements, you're like, man, I gotta get some food. I'm gonna die here.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So, just as I look at this, in this respect, we can't even begin to know how he must have been feeling at that moment in time.
Especially with all of that.
With all of it, I mean, just when this servant came, before he finished speaking, I mean, boom, 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 just
it
like
would be
that.
understandable to have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be a logical move.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Notice verse 20, and this is a very important idea. He arose. He began to show his grief. Now that he lost his children, he can replace cattle. He could replace camels. It would take him a while, but he could replace them. But with his children, you don't replace your children, even if you have other children. And before the story's over, he's going to have more children again. But and I've often
never forget him.
Yeah, he's never going to forget them, and it's never going to be the same.
Yeah, never the same. Yeah.
So as he tears, his common signs of grief are tearing the clothes. He tore his robe. He shaved his head. Again, under the Old Testament law. Now, again, you got to remember this, that they were not supposed to shave their head for the dead.
Yeah.
The Old Testament Mosaic law says you shall not cut the corner of your beards.
Was that why he was doing it? Or I was thinking when he had said that it might have been like shame or like sackcloth and ash. So
it's kind of the same idea of showing his grief.
Mm-hmm.
But notice he fell on the ground and he worshiped. Okay. Again, as I said, in the law of Moses, the shaving of the head was forbidden, Leviticus 21:5 and Deuteronomy 14. But it was something that the Gentiles practiced a lot, was shaving the head.
Yeah.
For grief. And so, he fell down and he worshiped. He realized that the good things, the prosperity he had, came from God. I don't know that, he did not know the conversation that Satan and God was having in heaven about him. What was his understanding of Satan? We don't know.
He might not have known. Well, I guess he knew from the garden, maybe. But we don't know that.
We don't
know that. That might not be something that was widely talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know that you're right. We don't even know that he did know of it.
We didn't know if he knew about a Satan.
Yeah.
So it may very well be that he looked at it from the viewpoint that God did it all.
Yeah.
Whereas we have the story of Job, we see Satan's works through Scripture, and we begin to understand, okay, there is another being that's fighting for our hearts.
Yeah.
And so
we're seeking to make us fail, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's right. So, we don't, here it is, adversity as well as prosperity both happen in this world. We live in a sinful world. God doesn't sanction sin, but God does allow men to suffer because of sin.
Yeah.
We realize that, think about, you've been in the army, but think about war.
Yeah.
How many innocent people are destroyed in war?
Yeah.
And is it because God is sanctioning that? Well, we do read in Scripture where God would.
I think it would go back to tribalism, though, because you have to say it like it's the same thing with the Old Testament. I know you don't necessarily agree with that, but here's the factor of the matter, and this is what I was saying in that class before. We benefit from that,
right?
So like you could say, okay, well, Jesus says that we should be peaceful and things like that. We should, on an individual level, we should do that. But here's the problem in this scenario: if tribes don't go to war, we would be forced into Islam or to die.
Right.
Or something.
Right.
You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? So, but yeah, I get what you're saying. I get it.
And so we've got to be very, very careful about, and I guess that's what I'm trying to do. A lot of people just jump to the conclusions God sends evil as well as good. No, God does not send evil. He's allowing, in the story, he's allowing Satan, the instigator of evil to begin with, to do this. And in a sense, notice I said that phrase, in a sense, because God allowed Satan to do that, you could say that God is the one who's ultimately responsible.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is where some people have problems with this. Is God ultimately responsible for the evil in the world? No. But
he gives them enough rope.
He gives, yeah. So this is where, whenever we're trying to figure out this whole situation of evil and God and how does God react to it, we see that he puts up with it. We see that there comes a point when he says enough's enough. He punishes, and goes back to what you were saying earlier. He takes one tribe and punishes another group of people.
Yeah. Well, the one thing about that people miss in all of that stuff, though, to me personally, now you and I will go right to that, but like they missed the point that, and Peter did miss that too when Jesus was talking to him when he was about to ascend, right? He said, "Well, we're going to save Israel." They missed the point of the whole thing was to set up this line that's going to come to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas people go and they try to convict God and be like, well, why did God allow them to go in here and give them victory to slaughter all these people, even including babies and children? Okay, well, what if he did it and everybody went to hell?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
That's a lot darker.
That's a lot darker. That's a lot darker. You're
so
right.
we just like you're talking to Job, it's the same thing. What he's trying to point out here
Mm-hmm.
is that we have to keep that in mind.
We've got to try. We've got to struggle with that the whole time. We've got to struggle with that and try to come to grips with all of that. And this is where, again, whenever you're sitting there discussing this with people, they just really get kind of bent out of shape about it. Okay. One of the things also that I notice here is that he fell down and worshiped.
Mm-hmm.
He did not blame God. He was in this state of submission to the will of God. And so the bottom line is while he was not privy to the discussion between Satan and God, he just attributed it to a God, and he says, okay, you know what? Even if even if God allows this trouble to come, that does not mean it's changed my relationship with him. I'm still going to worship him. I'm still going to honor him, even though I'm going through all of these bad things in my life. Does that teach us something? Does that help me as I'm struggling with whatever I'm having to go through?
I was thinking he might have very well been like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Like he might have been like actively seeking like, well, what is it you want? What is your will?
What is your will? What are you wanting? Again, all of that would have come from that desire to be in that relationship with God. And so, think about how many people, whenever bad things happen, they just quit. They
Jesus
quit God.
talks about that. They'll fall away.
Yeah, they'll fall away. Well, if God's going to treat me that way, then I'm not going to have. And think about it in this respect, going back to what you were saying earlier about the idea of punishment. Isn't that not just, shooting ourselves even further in the foot? I'm injured in the fact that, okay, God allowed this to happen to me, so I'm not going to serve him anymore. That's like,
I think it has to do with like maybe their anger with the situation and they're trying to hold somebody accountable. We have a lot of that in society that does that.
Right.
They put these people up there. Like, I don't even think Osama bin Laden's a real person. Like, I think he's an actor.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to put this face on evil every time. Like, this guy is so much worse than us.
Right.
We need to go over there. We need to do this. They have to get America geared up. Like, this is a fight for good and evil.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And that's so ironic because look at our country the way it is nowadays. Yeah. We don't have any standard of good and evil.
Yeah.
Except from God's word, really, when you get down to it. Because some people have no problems and compunctions whatsoever about killing somebody else.
Yeah.
Or raping somebody or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they've not been taught. So I guess what I'm trying to say out of all of this is looking at this is a lot of people give up and they quit. And it's kind of like you're turning away from the only person, from the only being that's going to give you some, you're not going to like what you're having to go through, but you can't turn away from the only person and being that's going to help you
It's
through
like
it.
suicide.
Yeah.
It's, you know, I mean, like, and not that that's suicide, but it's similar
Spiritual
to
suicide.
it's similar to suicide because it's like you're saying, well, things are really bad. And a lot of these people think that it's going to get better by committing suicide. And in fact, you just expedited the process.
That's right. That's right. And you're getting away from God, the only person that's going to be able to help you through this.
Yeah.
And this is where a lot of people do struggle. I'm going to blame God. Well, blame God all you want to, but the bottom line is it's not going to get you where you want to be eventually.
It's going to hurt you more
in the long haul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like hating your enemies. It just really just consumes you. It doesn't really.
That's right.
There's no purpose. They don't feel that.
No, they don't. It's kind of like, and I think some of us do this driving around Atlanta, you know, and you get behind somebody or somebody does something, cuts you off in traffic. It's like, what are you doing? You know, and you're hollering, and of course they're not hearing you. They're just doing whatever. And it's kind of, you're just hurting yourself.
Yeah.
You're just getting your blood pressure up for what? And I'm talking to somebody in the mirror.
And they're still going to drive slow or do whatever.
Or whatever they're going to do. You know? That's exactly right. So here it is. And notice what he says. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave. The Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, that's the first thing that he says. He got it half right.
What do you mean?
In this respect, the Lord has given him everything, but who really took it all away?
Oh,
Satan.
Yeah.
So he got it half right.
Well, I think, don't you think it's like the same thing that you're just attributing it to that?
Right.
It's like, okay, well, God's in control. He's the commander. We got to blame the chief.
We got to blame somebody.
We got to blame the officer.
That's
right.
right.
Blame the guy at the top.
But again, we've got to keep our focus back on the fact. And again, how much did Job know about Satan?
Maybe nothing.
That may be nothing. That's a whole nother point. So that's where the struggles come in, right? That's where struggles come in. He came out naked from his mother's womb. Paul was saying, 1 Timothy 6:7, we brought nothing into this world, we can take nothing out. You know,
from the dust you can.
That's right.
The dust you shall return.
Genesis 3:19. That's exactly right. So, you know, the dust returns to earth as it was, the spirit returns to God who gave it. Ecclesiastes 12:7.
It's funny though that they say that we're made of carbon. You know what carbon is, right? It's dust.
Right. That's exactly right. So here it is. He did not sin. And you gotta say something about him. Think about this, you know. The Lord gave. He has given us our comfort. He's given us our jobs. He's given us our blessings. The bottom line is he gives us these things. He's given us wealth. He's given us the ability to learn, to grow, to be what we need to be. And again, but if God chooses to take it all away, we really don't have the right to question that.
Yeah.
But we're going to.
Yeah.
We're going to. I mean, because it is.
But he says trials are going to come on you. Jesus talks about that so often, that trials are going to come on you. It's not maybe, possibly, it's coming.
It's coming.
It's definitely coming.
And another thing that comes into play there a lot too is who's he talking to? He's talking to his disciples.
Yeah.
And then he is specifically talking about things that they were going to see in their lifetimes. Peter would die. Every one of the apostles would die.
Yeah.
A violent death, not with the possible exception of John. But John was also in prison as he's writing the book of Revelation, so we don't know exactly how his life ended eventually.
Yeah.
So was he talking about specific things in their lives? Possibly.
I think it's part of the doctrine.
Yeah.
It's a part of the doctrine. I mean, we're all called to be disciples.
Yeah.
Everyone's supposed to be a disciple.
Yeah.
I mean, he's talking to several audiences. There was bigger groups there too, and he sent those guys out to be disciples too. So it wasn't just the 12. But I get what you're saying. But, but I mean, the trials, I think, is talking about, it's the same thing with the seeds when he says when he's cast the seeds on the different types of ground or whatever. Some fell on the rocks, some fell on this.
Right.
And he's like, well, in times of trying, they fall away.
Right.
Because their foundations weren't weren't strong.
weren't strong enough to deal with
They
it.
weren't built on a rock. They were built on sand.
Mhm.
You know?
That's right. That's right. So the Lord gave, the Lord's taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He's still worshiping God, even in his afflictions. We can still worship God in his afflictions. We can still bless the name of the Lord in our problems. We can thank God for our problems. We can thank God for reminders. And sometimes that's hard, but it's something that we need to learn lessons of. And so in all of this, and I like what he says in verse 22, in all of this, he did not sin against God. He did not charge God foolishly. He did not charge, in the New English Standard said, did not charge God with wrong. Okay. You know, sometimes again, we get inconsistent and impatient. Do we as the creature have the right to question the creator? No. No. So does this building have a right to fuss at us about the way this building was built?
Bill.
No.
But you know, what was I gonna say? Man, I forgot. I had it on tip of my tongue. I forgot it. I don't know. I forgot.
All right. So let's jump on into chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. So again, what's interesting to me as I look at this, Satan is presenting himself before the Lord as the angels of God are. Satan still has to answer to God.
Yeah.
Always. That's encouraging, comforting.
Well, you know, this is what he's saying again there. This is a separate incident here.
Mhm.
What are you going to do? Same thing.
Yeah.
Walking to and fro the earth.
That's right.
Seeking whom I may devour.
That's exactly right. From where have you come? Going to and from the earth, walking up and down on it. And the Lord said, okay, have you considered my servant Job? There's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. Now, that's the same thing he said earlier in chapter 1.
Yeah.
He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Now, one of the things that this passage helps me to understand a little bit more is even though Satan actually did this, God allowed him to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So even God says, you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. I could have stopped you, but I didn't. And so when you get down to it, God is ultimately not responsible for the wicked and evil, but he is ultimately responsible about what happens about everything. And so Satan says, okay, now, the only reason that the only reason Job hasn't done it is because you didn't allow me to touch him. Okay, now, a lot of things, there's a lot of things that I go into in this passage, and I'm thinking about this. There seems to be a day appointed in which all the angels will come and give an account to God for everything they've done. But to me, that also, I struggle with that a little bit because God is always, he knows everything anyway.
Well, I mean, but
Yeah.
yeah, I know what you're saying, but he still goes through the motions.
Right.
Sometimes he's still, it's like, well, what have you done? What have you done? How do you know this in the garden? Well, he knew he was going to do it.
Yeah.
But he's still going through the motions. And then sometimes it's like, even though he knows that a person, I believe this in my heart, that even though he knows that a person is possibly going to turn away from him at some point, he's still going to give them what he would give a person as long as they are in him. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the thing plays out again the same way it did in chapter 1.
It doesn't say time period either, though.
No.
So you don't know if that was years or days or months or whatnot.
Well, that's true. And we've got to take that into consideration as well. I'm thinking it was a short period of time.
Probably.
Because it's given Job a time to sort through these things.
Yeah.
But I also envision in my mind that it wasn't a very long period of time, because Satan comes back and asks to actually touch Job himself. So he wants to keep piling it on while Job is still hurting.
Yeah.
Because the more you pile on when somebody's hurting, then the more they're willing to give up.
He does do that, but he comes at you at a weak time.
Yeah. And it's not like he's going to cut you any slack.
Yeah.
If he can have the opportunity to get back again, come back at you as quick as he can, then there you go.
Yeah.
Notice again, the Lord gives him the same points. He says he's a blameless and upright man. He fears God. He still holds fast his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. You incited me. And so he said, just says what? Skin for skin. All right. So he's been over the earth. He's trying to find more followers for himself. He has burden to those who are Christians, who to cause doubt and despair. He's dropping hints of doubt and despair everywhere he goes. He's always looking for that ideal. And again, he's always looking for what? The ideal of destroying us some way, somehow or another. So again,
Or having us join him in hell.
that's it. That's it. Notice that God commends Job, even though Satan has attacked him, and that probably hurt him a little bit. And so, Job is saying, what? And this is something that, again, we should be teaching the church and ourselves as well. We can fight Satan. We can fight him.
Mm.
Peter says again, you rejoice now for a little while. You've been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith is more precious than the gold that perishes.
What do you mean by fighting?
Huh?
What do you mean by fighting? You mean like go away from temptations?
Yeah, fight the temptations, fight the things that Satan's throwing at us.
Mm-hmm.
He will say, fight the good fight of faith, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of what it is. So the thing is he says, you've allowed me to do this without cause. There was no reason for us to do this, to destroy him without reason. And he says, okay, the only reason is because you're not letting me touch him. So he's a relentless enemy. He's always going to, he hates everybody trying to serve the Lord. And he's going to do all he can.
Because they're making him look bad.
Yeah, to make him look bad. He's going to do all he can to separate us from God, to cause us to give up, to cause us to sit back and say, forget it. Temptation would not appeal to us unless it appeals to our flesh. If we truly saw what was going on behind the scenes that we're seeing here, then hopefully it would give us even that much more armor to fight against the temptation. Satan wants us. Satan wants us to go or turn away from God.
You know, the thing like we were talking about war and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
This is what a lot of people don't consider. Like with soldiers, we have to follow a certain set of rules. Like there's a Geneva Convention, and
Right.
it's like a moral code
Right.
that we follow that others don't follow.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I would think like God's angels, like they're still got to be righteous. They can't cross over that line.
That's right.
God's good angels
Right.
can't cross over that line just to win, like
Mm-hmm.
use evil against evil or use, you know what I'm saying?
That's right.
So they still have to be a superior, higher moral ground.
That's right. And that's a very, very good point that you're making in that respect. And so, Satan still believes he can get Job, but he said, you know what? He says, all a man has, he'll give for his life. Another thing that the devil does that we don't often think about, but he lies.
But
He
Jesus
lies.
said that.
He's a slanderer.
Mhm.
He's a liar. He's been a liar since the beginning. He's still, so,
That's what he said, believe the lie. So they would believe the lie rather than the truth.
That's right.
Joy.
So think about it in this respect. We want truth shines brighter when we see the real lies.
Yeah.
Right. And that's something that challenges us again. So here he's asking for the opportunity to strike Job himself. You gave me a commandment, chapter 1 at verse 12, not to touch him. But he says, I guarantee you let me touch him now, he will curse you. Notice God says, okay. He's in your hand. Spare his life. All right. So God always puts limit on how far Satan can go. That should be encouraging to us. God is
He provides a way out.
Provide a way out.
Mhm.
God does not allow Job to be killed, because then the whole lesson we're studying here is you can persevere in the midst of problems and
Yeah.
trials and difficulties,
No matter how bad it is.
no matter how bad it is. And again, this is still a test. So he's only allowed to go how far? You must not kill him.
Yeah.
Okay. So it seems like as you read this, Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head.
Did they say anything about his wife through all this? I didn't hear that when it said the kids died.
Didn't say anything. Verse 9 tells us
Okay.
his wife is still alive.
Okay.
His wife is going to come on him and say, look. And when we get into this situation, I want you to remember this. You think about his wife, she's lost her kids too.
Yeah.
She's lost her wealth, and now she's watching her husband suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And she's had it. She's done. Curse God and die. She's going to encourage him to curse God and die.
Mm.
So it's something, you know. Think about the idea that he went out from the,
What does that even mean? Curse God and die?
Yeah.
No. I don't understand that. I mean, I understand what it's trying to, I guess the words it's saying, but I don't. Curse God and then die?
Yeah.
Like, just get it over with?
Just get it over with. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's kind of what it boils down to.
That's
So
crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. And again, think about the idea that Satan probably couldn't stand to be in the sight of God long because of God's holiness.
Yeah.
You know, I'm amazed sometimes as I look at these passages, I'm amazed that Satan actually came into God's presence on a lot of occasions. So, you know, in the think about whenever he tempted Jesus, you know, that had to be awful for Satan.
What Jesus is his since I don't know, that's a confusing subject, but his divinity is not, I don't know, that's complicated.
Yeah.
His divinity, he's divine, but he's not where he would be in heaven.
Yeah.
Like in a human body.
Right.
Some of that is removed,
Yeah.
right? Some of it is in order for him to even, I mean,
come to
if you
the
think
earth.
about it,
Some of it.
in order for him to even inhabit a human body without exploding it,
Yeah.
and just overwhelming it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm
So
saying?
he gave up some things too.
Yeah.
And in fact, you will talk about Philippians 2, where he gave up a lot
Yeah.
to come here to this earth to be a human.
Yeah.
So, and that gets you into a whole nother
Category.
a whole nother discussion for ages that we'll never be able to really know for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing about Satan, he seems to think he can win. He went out from the presence of the Lord, struck him with loathsome sores. There's a lot of discussion as to what this was, what sickness was. Some of them call it, the King James Version call it boils.
What's the what you call it? What is the actual word?
The Hebrew word?
Yeah, let's see what the Hebrew word is.
Not sure off the top of my head. Hold on a minute. I can look it up. It's Job chapter 2, verse which one? Verse 7. Loathsome sores.
That's not accurate.
That's the English Standard Version.
I'm saying that, yeah, no, I have New King James.
Okay.
Like, but I'm saying those words you got to watch out for.
Right.
You know, like they were talking about pharmakeia, you know, in Revelation, they translate it as sorcery.
That's right.
It means a lot of different things.
That's exactly right.
Like the word circumference is a lot of things. It actually includes drugs in there too.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting.
Job 2, verse 7. Okay. Hold on just a sec. I got Logos Bible software, so I've got it here on my computer. And struck with painful boils, a burning sore. Some people, or a lot of them, think it's elephantiasis. It's a disease that make the feet swell and makes your leg look like an elephant's leg.
That's what people believe it means.
Huh? That's what some people think. The Hebrew suggests a burning sore.
Well, you know, like,
Okay.
do you remember what happened to the Ethiopians, or you could translate it someone would translate it something different, but it's the Ethiopians. That's literally who they were. When they took the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
And they translated it as hemorrhoids or something like that.
Hemorrhoids. They do.
And that's not a good.
No, it's not a
it's
good.
not a good analogy, because that's not exactly what it was. And when they do that, then it causes you, because they made a golden one, a version of the boil,
Right.
and it causes you to like be confused about the whole subject.
Right.
It means something totally different. Sometimes it's like you said, it's like sickness, something, a generic term, or something that circumferences a lot.
Right.
Like what we're getting into the food.
Have you ever had a boil?
I don't know. What a boil, that could be a lot of different
It's
things.
a skin infection.
Yeah. They had boils,
but they're worse
black
than,
plague.
yeah, they're worse than pimples.
Yeah, it's really big.
It's really big. There's a lot of fever involved in it. I've been there and done that. I've done that 2 or 3 times.
Yeah,
And in fact,
neck when I was like young, and it's still scars. So
yeah, I had one. You want to get, this is wild.
I pick at things like that.
Yes, I do too. But I had one right here.
Oh, yeah, on your face.
Right
You have to
here.
go to a doctor.
Yes, I had to go to the doctor. He tried to squeeze it out, and they gave me antibiotics, and it was unbelievable what it came out of that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It just.
Well, but see that's a good point there. It's the same thing where I go back to that too, though, is that, well, we're likening that to a certain thing, right?
But we've got to be careful.
But no, I mean, like flat out, like the boils that were on the skin of those in the Black Plague, that's not the same kind of boil. No, it's an infection. It's like your what do you call it? Your lymph nodes. It's an infection. Your body's pushing something out of your body, but it might not necessarily, like I said, generic term, puts your pumpets a lot of different things. Yeah, and it could be something that's not just pus or something like that. It could be some sort of like something that's spreading. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Smallpox. Smallpox can be considered a boil.
Yeah.
It could be like a lot of different things.
And again, this.
But I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So he'd take this potsherd and scrape them, get the infection out.
Yeah.
It would hurt. It would be painful. It'd be very, very painful as it goes through it. And again, fever. He would be running a fever for it all. Yeah. So whenever you look at all of this, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, he's just one big sick person. And all he's doing is he's sitting in ashes. The ashes, sitting in the ashes, would represent the ideal of weeping and sorrowful because of what is all that's going on. He's struggling with all of this in every respect of the term. And so there's, there's a lot there. Some, like I said, some people do describe it as elephantiasis. It's just horrible. We can't even begin to imagine. And again, he's scraping it away. His children are gone.
Leprosy. Isn't that what we call it?
Leprosy is a little different.
No, but what I mean is like it was a generic term.
Yeah, it was a very generic term to describe a lot of different things. Yeah. In our viewpoint today, it's one specific thing. It's Hansen's disease or something like that, what they call it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's probably not what it was then.
Yeah. So, he's that. So just try to put yourself again in his place. As I was making this up, she's looking at him sick, feverish, lost his children. She's lost the children. She's losing her husband. She's watching him die. And so she just says, "Did you still hold fast your integrity? Just curse God and die. Just curse God and die." And he says, you speak among like a what? Like a evil woman, foolish woman. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil or disaster? Is another way to put that particular phrase. And in all of this, here's the thing: God did not sin with his lips. He didn't shake his fist to heaven at this stage of the game.
He says, shall we not accept adversity? What
Yeah.
can we do about it?
Yeah, what can you do? You've got to deal with it. You've got to deal with it, right?
That is true, though. Be like,
But also is interesting. She is also being used by Satan to encourage him
yeah, they did the same thing.
to do what Satan wants done anyway.
He uses people close to him.
Right. So, you know, are you so obstinate in your religion that nothing can cure you of it? Are you still remaining faithful to a God who will allow you to suffer this way? I hear people say something like that now, How can I believe in God whenever he allows this kind of suffering to go on in the world? So again, what is she saying? She's saying blaspheme God's name. Tell him, he's not there. Be your own helper. Have yourself killed. Be your own executioner. Kill yourself. Death is better than trying to live like this.
Like that's gonna make everything. Let's multiply.
Yeah, that's right. Let's also.
But you can see, I get where you're at.
Yeah.
I can see where somebody would think like that. Well, I mean, sickness. Some people say that nowadays. Remember they had that guy Kevorkian or whatever.
Yeah.
He used to help people kill themselves.
Yeah.
Like some people think that, like they're like so much pain, whatever else.
That's right. And a lot of people have probably done.
I don't agree with
it. I don't think so. I don't think we have the right to take our lives.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. But
it should be off the table.
It should be.
It shouldn't be.
But now we're having states
that's like
that's advocating assisted suicide.
I was talking to somebody about this before, like, people like whatever it is, Olympic athlete, whoever, whatever somebody wants to do in life, they talk about this too. They say that how do they get to the finish line? How do they go all the way there and do this thing that people like, wow, how do they do that?
Mm-hmm.
You take the option off the table of failing.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not going to accept it.
That's right.
And once you accept it, then you start working past, because if you let failure get in there in your mind, you let suicide get in there and think about it,
mm-hmm.
You're going to mull it over and you might eventually do it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I think some people are predisposed to doing it. I think, in the fact that
they're weaker in that sense.
I think,
weaker to it.
We've got to be careful about that. I think about a lot of veterans that have seen horrors that we can only imagine. And they can't ever get it out of their minds. What they've done, what they've seen done. So they kill themselves or they try to find ways, and you know what I'm trying to say, they just want out of this world.
It causes psychological problems.
It does. And PTSD.
Yeah, I know you're saying. I mean, I have PTSD, but it's something that goes. Like I said, though, there's a sense in there, like if you're looking for a life preserver, you might find it. If you're not, like suicide has never been an option for me. No matter what I've been through, I've never right. Well, let me sit here and sit in that idea for a while.
Right.
If I had been that person that was more susceptible to that type of thing, just like somebody might be more susceptible to take the route of homosexuality when they're tempted. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's not temptation. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like it's not even like, because I know what you're saying. People get really, really dark. Really, really dark, like they're just in a deep depression, and like if you let it, the devil will put that on you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
He'll throw that option at you, and he'll do it at the perfect time too. Like it's like a game plan that's been structured, like football or whatever. It's been structured, perfect moment to strike.
That's right.
Right now.
And I think that's what he's doing here, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what he's doing here.
Just kill yourself.
Just kill yourself. That's what she says.
It'll all be over.
And the thing is Job did not sin. He, I've got to praise him. I've got to praise Job for his steadfastness. Now, as we go through the book, and the longer this lasted, we're going to see him saying some things. Like he wants to call, toward the end of the book, he's actually going to say, I want to take God to court. I want him to answer to me. And God doesn't ever do that. But God does understand. And I think it's important to understand that. One person said this. One author wrote this: it's easier to lower our view of God than it is to raise our faith to such height.
Yeah.
It is easier to bring God down to our level.
Exactly.
Than to.
Well, I told you that's
grow.
the natural thing of human beings.
Yeah.
It's not, it's like it's something your mind can't wrap around. Like God's omnipresent. God is not bound by time.
Right.
God, he can be everywhere all the time at one time.
Mm-hmm.
He can do all these things. He can structure these things in the world where the world's spinning. That's why people talk going off in space is so crazy.
Right.
It's like, this is the perfect environment. If one thing was slightly off, nothing would happen.
That's right.
We would all die.
That'd be the end of it.
Darkness, we'd freeze to death, or we'd burn up from the sun.
That's right.
Or, this is like the perfect environment. It's a center stage. It's like God put this right in the middle, right there, in all this space and all of that. There's so many things, like we were talking about when he's answering him. And it's like I was saying before, he's doing all this stuff. The world just keeps spinning. The world keeps spinning. The sun is still producing plants and stuff for food. The animals are still being, producing and going around. These are all little smaller things on a much bigger scale. I mean, they seem small, but you know what I'm saying.
That's right.
Like, that's still got to happen. Those things have got to keep going. So that's what he's talking about too. He's like, things are a lot bigger than you think they are.
That's right.
For me to explain that to you, like, bam,
And I think you really touched on the real theme of the whole book. God is saying to him, what? You can't know. You're not there. You weren't there when I created the world. You weren't there when I've done all of this. Job, you really don't have the right to question me about all this.
Yeah.
And that is where we're going to stop this week.
Yeah.
Because that's it. So next week is going to be the 25th.
25th.
I think so.
So this is the next part is talking about his friends. Job has sinned. Job, of course, has birth.
We're going to get his friends, and then we're going to start getting into the actual discussions they have.
Yeah.
So this is what the plan is to go from there. Okay.
I got you. So
that's where we're going to start.
I've never done a deep study of this one. I'm excited about this. So
this is an interesting study, and we're going to see him wrestling with all of this stuff, big time. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to reteach it.
Did you go through this? This is what you were referencing? I bought this book. So
yeah, it's a very good book. It's a very good commentary.
This is where you got some of the stuff.
Some of the stuff that I'm using here. Yes, I got some of it, but I've taught it before.
Yeah.
And I use whatever commentaries I use then, and I keep just adding. And this is one I encourage you to do. Again, if you think about getting a computer or something like that, take all the stuff that you got and then just keep adding to it.
You don't put it on digits, like type it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've done a little bit of that, and I'm trying to get organized. I was a writer, wrote songs and stuff, and sometimes I write kind of sloppy. So like, I still keep a notebook handy. Like if I'm like, I got stacked all these verses that like for a certain reason or something like that. Like once saved, always saved. I got like 100 verses.
Have a good night.
Have a good night, brother. I hope everything's okay. Did you learn a lot?
Well, yeah, I enjoy it.
Good.
Yeah. So now next time is on Thursday. On Thursday is online. That's what you say.
We're only doing this at nights right now.
Okay,
Hopefully, eventually, maybe we will be going to or daytimes, but right now we're doing it for nights
okay,
for people that are working and they want to come in from work and study.
okay,
Okay?
yeah. So Thursday will be the same time,
Yeah, every week,
every week,
Yeah.
Tuesday and Thursday,
Tuesday and Thursday, 6:30 to 9.
6 to 9.
Okay?
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening.
Take care.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I was gonna say something too. I was thinking, if you like, just like the studying the Greek thing too.
Uh-huh.
Like, I was thinking, if you sometimes if you like want to get really deep into something, like we were doing a little bit of that. I mean, I don't know my way around the lexicon in the concordance that well. I know enough to where, I mean, I know some of those words. Like some of those words we were studying there.
Yeah.
But what I was gonna say is like some of this stuff you could probably go back there, which there might be some, especially the words that are in question or something